it was inspired by this wonderful essay by Immanuel Kant, which he published in 1795. And he was trying to deal with a problem that he saw. He had been persuaded by other philosophers that world government was not only difficult, but probably tyrannical, given our many separate identities and the difficulties of ruling across very long distances. But at the same time, he was outraged by the immense injustices and suffering of war, the ways in which war denied the duty that we all have to recognize the fact that every human being should be treated like an end, not a means. And recognizing that duty, he thought to be one of the essential attributes of our claim to a moral, conscious, thinking existence. So it was really important to him. So war is horrible. World government is neither desirable nor possible. And so he thought about, could we imagine a peace that was self-executing, that was executing or self-actualizing by independent states that would nonetheless be reliable enough that it would constitute a goal that one should work towards, and that would provide a sufficient intellectual guarantee that it would be something that would be sensible, that it was not only good but doable, and those two are naturally connected together. And what he came up with was the idea of a hypothetical peace treaty. And it starts out with a series of preliminary articles that are designed to create better understanding, enhanced respect, a little bit more trust amongst existing member states whom he thought to be in what was otherwise a state of war, where everyone was suspiciously looking at each and every one, and the duties of the statesmen were national security first. But they could begin to do a bit of trust building, a bit of confidence building, to use a modern metaphor. And if those were then tried, it opened up the possibility of call it a constitutional convention, where well-meaning statespersons could come together, he had in mind monarchs in the first instance, and pledge to ascribe to 3 definitive articles, which, if they were fulfilled, would give each and every one of them the expectation that they could live together in a future of peace. And the 3 articles were, first, that each of these states would be a republican government, by which he meant that there would be a separation of power between the executive and the judiciary and the legislative. And that contributes to deliberation. It allows a state to be more rational, more careful, less overcome by passions or particular self-interest. And secondly, that it would be a representative government, one that represented the citizens of the country. And that, to speak modern social science, would tend to align the interest of the ruler with those that he, or possibly, though not for Kant, we have to mention she, would represent. And so that the idea that one could engage in wars, as he saw some monarchs doing, on the basis of whims or self-interest or pure glory of the monarch, or to support arms industries or to make militaries happy, would be much, much less likely because the state would respond to the representative institutions and the mass of the people would be the cannon fodder. They'd have to pay all the taxes. They'd be much less likely to get into unnecessary wars of one sort or another that would gratify the interests of the monarch. So that was step one. It created a rational republican state responsive to a representative assembly, advantaged by a deliberative scheme of constitutionalism. Step two, he thought that they should have a formal pledge to each other, that they would live at peace in ways that respected the rights that each individual had to live at peace. And this would create a reliable legal commitment that would be made. And this commitment would be credible because it would be made by these republican states that are, he thought, responsive, and ones that could recognize the common rights of all individuals amongst these fellow republican states, because each and every one of these states represented those free citizens and acted through them. So one created a credible legal commitment based upon the kinds of institutions these were and the kind of ideological or moral commitments these states had to the common rights of all human beings. And the third thing he wanted to do is that he knew that these separate nations, separate states, knew relatively little about each other. They would have sometimes false nationalistic understandings. And so he thought it was very important that they come into contact with each other under legitimate circumstances. The legitimate circumstances, this is what he calls his third law, were those of cosmopolitan respect. That is, they were voluntary. States would trade with each other if they wanted to. They would welcome investors, if you will, or what we would now call tourist visitors who would come on the matter of individual choice because they were curious, because they thought they might, he had read Adam Smith, be advantaged by trading with each other. They would all have a potentially superior standard of living than they would have if they had no trade. And he thought there was a duty, recognizing the common humanity, that if somebody was in desperate straits of their life, you would be welcomed on the shores of another country and not expelled. This is a principle that 2 centuries or so later gets embodied in the Refugee Convention of 1951, the principle of non-refoulement, which means that somebody who has a legitimate fear of persecution can't be expelled once they arrive at the shores or across the border of a country. So these three things together, he thought, would establish a reliable peace. That is, republican institutions, a commitment to peace based upon a recognition of the common rights of all human beings, those that are now reliably, especially represented by republican states. And third, a cosmopolitan order of ever, he thought, increasing contact in the way of trade, tourist, and other exchanges of scholars and individuals, so that we'll come to a better and better understanding of our common humanity and respect for the differences, legitimate differences of our culture. And he thought this would provide a reliable basis for peace amongst these fellow republican states. It didn't end the problem of war because some states would not be willing to join this scheme of peace. That is, they wouldn't be willing to become republican. They wouldn't be willing to pledge commitment to international law. They wouldn't contemplate the cosmopolitan law of mutual respect and exchange. But for those that did, this constituted a peace, a separate peace amongst them that he thought over time, even though he thought it would collapse every once in a while, but over the longest period of time would be likely to grow. And he's not just a constitution designer, or he's certainly not a political scientist. For him, this philosophic exercise, the real purpose of it was to provide the moral grounds for which statesmen should strive to peace, because it was hypothetically possible. And that's what that wonderful little essay was all about.